Welcome to Snow's Chess Academy, Lesson 1-1 on chess history. Yes, we're going to learn about the Royal Game's rich history. Of course, it's never been rich financially, but rich in culture. Now, where did chess start? Very good question. Well, many people believe it started in India, right here in India. It was, of course, called Chaturanga or Chaturanga. You can look that up yourself in order to find out the real pronunciation. And from India, it moved over to Iran, or Persia as it was called. It was very popular there, where it remains popular today. Then from there, it moved westward across, stopping briefly in both Italy and Spain, where some of the very first and best chess writing started, beginning with Ruy Lopez back in 1475. Now, Ruy Lopez was, in fact, a Spanish bishop. One of the first things he ever wrote was that you should play the game outdoors with the sun in your opponent's eyes. Ruy, clever fellow. Another fellow who wrote a great deal about chess was Guicciino Grieco. He was from Italy, and around 1619, 1620, he wrote about chess, talking about how the game should be played, showing many of his first games that he played that were, of course, his victories. From there, chess proceeded on to France. In the 1700s, chess was amazingly popular in France. In fact, the oldest chess club today, the Café de la Régence, is still in operation, and should you ever happen to get there, you should most certainly check it out. Now, of course, in France, we had Andrés Philidor. He was the great French player and seen as one of the greatest players. Now, around the early part of the 19th century, chess began to settle into merry old England, where the chess pieces took a great change in appearance. You see, there'd been no uniform appearance of chess pieces. Some had camels and elephants and chariots. In fact, the word rook comes from the Arabian word ruh, which means chariot. But the British were able to make chess uniformed. No longer would there be elephants and camels fouling the court. No, we would simply have bishops and rooks and knights, and they would all be uniform, and the rules became uniform as well. So around 1820, Howard Staunton, of course here in Virginia we call it Stanton, but Howard Staunton created the Staunton design of chess pieces, which is what we think of as our chess pieces today. So chess pieces have pretty much stayed the same since 1820. Now, around about 1850 or thereabouts, chess got very popular in the city that Care forgot, known as New Orleans, where the first great American player, Paul Morphy, began to make chess history. Paul Morphy was a gentleman. His father was a lawyer. His uncle was a judge. Paul did not have to work for a living, even though he did get a degree in law. He chose to spend his time and energy, and unfortunately just about everything else he had, in chess. Paul came to Europe, played some of the best players in Europe, and from there he proceeded onward back to the U.S. and offered the world move and odds, and we'll talk about that later, what that means. And there were no takers, so he was declared champion. Having no more challenges, he became very, very sad and unfortunately gave up chess pretty much altogether against serious competition. Then after him came across a small math teacher in the city of Austria, the country of Austria. His name was Adolf Anderssen. Now, Adolf Anderssen didn't make a whole lot of money. He wasn't able to travel much, but he did get it together and was able to travel to London in 1851. Now, in 1851, they had the largest, greatest chess tournament of its time up to that point, and Adolf Anderssen won that tournament and became world champion. Now, Anderssen was a very gentle man, very kind man, and he played a match against Wilhelm Steinitz, who was also from Austria. Steinitz defeated him and was named world champion. Now, Wilhelm Steinitz was a real pioneer in chess. He wrote about chess very intelligently. He invented what were called the 14 elements of chess. So the idea is that these elements are similar to the many elements in chemistry. He came up with his 14 elements. Some people have made them more concise, but basically Steinitz's 14 elements are still very, very important. From there, Steinitz was defeated by Lasker in 1894. Lasker held the world championship for 27 years. Not bad. Steinitz held it for about the same time. Some say 28. Still a little debate about that. And then Lasker was bested by the Cuban. Let's take a look. There's Cuba. In 1921 by the great Cuban Jose Capablanca. Capablanca was one of the first great players to play a style of chess we know today as positional chess. They called him the chess machine. Capablanca, in a career of 40 years, lost only about 40 games. he went through a period of 8 years without losing a single game. Capablanca knew the game. He was a Cuban diplomat. He was able to travel the world and play in a wide variety of tournaments. He was bested in 1927 by Alexander Alekhine, something you would say were you to have to eat something you didn't like. Alekhine was a classically educated man from Russia. He spoke 6 languages, just an amazing intellectual talent. He, like Paul Morphy, highly educated, chose to pour it all into chess. Alekhine was an interesting character, and I think I'm being very, very charitable when I say interesting, and that he changed allegiances a few times over history, especially during the war. Alekhine was the first of the great Russian champions. Now, chess became a big part of Russian, or I should say at that time, Soviet culture. It began to be taught in the schools. Alekhine was briefly lost the World Championship in 1935 and won it back in a rematch in 1937 against the premier gentleman Max Uwe from Holland. Now, around the war, the chess, of course, took a great hit. World wars are very, very bad for chess. You see, chess players can't really travel very far during world wars, and many of them get imprisoned and suffer terrible consequences because of wars. So after the war was over, Alekhine was well past his prime in the late 1940s, and he was getting ready to defend his title. However, as his title match got closer and closer, we find another incredible and mysterious and very interesting thing happened to Alekhine. He died under rather mysterious circumstances. Some people say he died of a heart attack, some people say he choked to death on a piece of meat, and some people say, yes, he was even murdered. Well, now we have a dead champion and a vacant chess title. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to call together some of the best players in the world, have a tournament, and the winner will be the champion. Well, Botvinnik was another great Russian player. He won this tournament hands down, and Mikhail Botvinnik, who was considered the founder of the Soviet chess school and one of the first helpers to invent chess computers, proceeded on to become world champion. The Russians controlled chess for about 45 years. A variety of great players came along that way until 1972, when a tough kid from Brooklyn by the name of Bobby Fischer came over and took the world championship in 1972. Fischer, unfortunately, let's just say he was a rather abrasive figure, to say the least, and he had problems getting along with many different people. Although he was a perfect gentleman at the board, he had many disagreements with all the variety of organizers and tournament officials, and he disagreed about how his title defense should be made, and so in 1975 he lost by default to Anatoly Karpov. Karpov, like Capablanca, was a great positional chess player. Now, Capablanca held the world championship for 10 years, and then in 1985 he lost it to the great Garry Kasparov. My personal favorite. I believe Kasparov is probably the greatest player who ever lived. Although the current world champion Magnus Carlsen may well give him a run for that money. So, Kasparov stayed world champion for 15 years, losing a rather celebrated tournament to the IBM computer Deep Blue. And then shortly thereafter, Kasparov retired. He was then replaced by Vladimir Kramnik. Kramnik held the title for a few years, was later bested by the Indian Vishy Anand, and chess had come full circle, starting in India and then ending with an Indian championship. Just recently, Magnus Carlsen of Finland, a 22-year-old wunderkind, became the new world champion, defeating Vishy Anand, who had held the championship for 7 years. So that is, in a nutshell, chess history in terms of the players and how chess evolved across the country. Now, some of the last countries to get chess were Japan and China, and yet they've lost very little time in leaping into the chess world. Current women's champion is Hu Yifan from China. I hope you've enjoyed this first segment of Snow's Chess Academy History of Chess. Thank you so much.